All right, we're back, and it's COMP397, and it's week 6, lesson 6, part 3. That last one was a pretty big one. Went for about an hour or so. This one I'm hoping to make a little shorter, but still, we've got to talk about what to do now. So we've got all these symbols. Last one we kind of put together all these symbols. I made some placeholders for the symbols we got, the banana, bar, bell, and so on. But we've got a bunch of these things now. We also have a slot machine graphic. But right now I have some positioning. If I go back here, I've got this couple things going on, right? I've got the positioning of this symbol here. So this is where these are each of the reels, if you will. I need to record this, and I need to record the positions of each of my buttons. This is important because when we position it in the real state on the stage, we need to know where all the buttons and objects go. Now, if you remember what we did last time, right, when we were putting together that calculator idea, right? So I'm going to go back out here. I'm going to go back to the calculator example. I had in my calculator project, right, this idea that I kind of did the same thing, right? I need to kind of record everything in an Excel sheet or some kind of notes or something that you're going to take. So you can record the positions of everything. That's important to do, right? So going back to my my slot machine project then, I'm going to kind of kick off. I'm going to use Excel. You can use Notepad. You can use whatever to kind of kick off whatever you like to do and to kind of record everything, right? So in Excel, right, I'm going to make a new sheet, right? And one day when my Excel responds, there we go. I'm going to make a new sheet, and I'm going to make it so that it's pretty big, right? I'm going to zoom in here so you can see it pretty good, right? I'm also going to make it so that the size of my cells are 20, just so that you can see what they are. And also that my cells, the background for my cells are all white, just so that makes it a little easier. So I'm going to call this, whatever the object is. Here's my object, right? And then here's my width. Remember I did this last time, width and height. I'm recording this stuff. And then my position, my X position and my Y position. These are important things to record because you know what? I need to kind of put this, and I need to record all this stuff. So as I get going, as I move and create my little table, right? That's what I'm doing here. And I'm just gonna make this little table here. And I'll say it, like I'll put all this up on GitHub for you so you have the process, the whole process. So my object, this is the first piece. So my first object, if I go back to fireworks, right, is these slots, this position where all these reels are going to appear. So this would be like reel 1, right? My reel 1 is 64 by 64. I know that that's the size it's going to be, right? This is where it's going to be, whatever it's going to be called, my symbol, if you will, my symbol template. And my first position is 53 by 173. So this is how it is on my slot machine, 53 by 173. That's kind of an odd number, right? But that's just what it is, right? Because my slot machine is, 320 by 480. The way those symbols appeared on my slot machine, it is. That's what it's going to look like, 53 by 173. I know my width and my height. If I go back, my width and my height is 64 by 64, right? That's my width and my height. These are for each of my symbols. So slot symbols, and that's our slot reel 1, let's say, because that's the first reel it's going to be. And this position is where my slot symbols are going to appear. Slot reel 1, okay. And I know I need slot reel 2 and slot reel 3. It's kind of like where they're going to appear, right? I don't have 2 and 3 yet. Oops. I don't have 2 and 3 yet, so I can copy these. So I can go here and copy and paste. And I'm going to drag and drop kind of this stuff around here. I'm going to zoom in to be precise, within reason. Again, right? I'm still in that keep it simple, stupid kind of way of doing things, right? That's kind of the right position. And then I will copy again and kind of move over to this one. And then drag that one across so that it is in the right position as well. Okay. So if you notice, this one is 173, this one's at 173, and this one's at 173. but they're different positions. This one's at 129, and this one's at 204x. 129 and 204, and I'll just take this the same. For my slots, these are all the same, right? Okay, good. I'm going to save this thing now because I'm starting to record stuff. I'm going to save this as almost like a position record. So I'm going to go to courses, COMP397, inside my slot machine project, and call this, you know, like kind of like UI positions element. That's what it's called, UI element positions. That's what they are, right? I'm going to make this so that you see a little bit fancy. Give it a different border type. And change the background color. All right, and then, so those are my reels. Those are good. I need my buttons, and that's really it at the end of the day, right? So now that I've got my reel positions, oh, I also need the other stuff too. Okay, I can't forget those things. Get rid of these things. I don't need them anymore. I need my button positions, and I've got them grouped. I'm going to ungroup them now. And I'm going to, so I can go into each individual button. So this first button, my reset button, is going to be at, it's 49 by 49, and it's going to be 16 by 334. So my reset button, 49 by 49. I love it. And it's going to be at 16 and 334, 16 and 334. I'm recording these things so that I can absolutely position them on my, we're using absolute positioning in this particular example, 75. And that's going to be for my bet1 button. Bet1 button. Now you guys can see why I'm doing this right now, but you will. 135. And this is my bet10 button. And this Bitmaps is at 49 by 40, oh, sorry, by 196. Now they're odd numbers, right? And my spin button. I love it. 225. Spin button is like the most important button, right? If you don't have those, you can't spin the reels. That would be bad, right? Okay, so I've got my buttons positioned. I get rid of them. So I don't need those anymore, because those are going to be put on after, right? Okay, now I need to know where my jackpot is. Where is my jackpot going to be positioned? This jackpot label, right? Where is my player credits, player bet, and spin results label? Where are they going to go? Because I got to put some stuff in there, right? So let's position this the way it is. So I'm going to kind of, if I kind of use my symbol, it's going to be from here at X. And if I was going to print the label, I'm going to kind of put a label in here to start typing, so I get approximately where it's going to be. Right? And I have to do a little bit of trial and error here. So let's say my jackpot is going to start off at 5,000, right? How do I want this to be? I kind of want it to be positioned, I could put it in the middle, right? This is where my jackpot's going to be. And if I know if it's going to be positioned like this and if it's going to grow, like a centering kind of thing, that's fine. My top left corner is what I really care about, so which is at 146 by 97. I don't know if that's the right size, though. That's about 14 point or 10 point. Let's make this a little bigger. I think that might not be right. There we go. That looks a little better, actually. A little bit bigger, 5,000, right? And that's about 145 by 96. So that's my jackpot label. Just going to go back. And it's going to be approximate. We're going to have to correct that, as you'll see. So again, I don't care about the size so much. I care about the positioning because the size is going to be automatic because we're going to actually type it out. We're going to use programming for that. So 145 by 96, approximately. That may change. Okay, we need a couple more labels, or 3 more labels. So I'm going to kind of Control-C, Control-V here. My other label that I have is going to be down here. I'm just going to take this jackpot size, so I don't have to use, I'm just going to use it as sizing. Player credits are going to be probably the same as well, maybe approximately right there in the middle, right? I'm going to say 41 by 303. I don't know what's happening today with my mouse. 41 by 303 approximately, and this is going to be my player credits label. So call it credits label for now. And then I'm going to copy and paste this one just to keep it on the same line. So maybe what's right in the middle, that's good. So approximately 144 by 303. Interesting. And my 144, eh? Maybe we'll make it 145, just because it's the same as my jackpot label. It'll appear in here for now. And it's something 303, I know that. We just need the positioning. And this won't be called jackpot label, this is going to be called bet label, right? And my spin result label is approximately there. Again, a little bit of trial and error, but about 247 by 303. Okay. Result label. What did I say it was? 247. Thank you. Okay, good. So I've kind of mapped out what I want. I'm going to save this thing here. My UI element positions, right? So I don't, my sizes aren't relevant here because they're not objects that are going to be fixed. They're going to be generated, right? And they'll be different because I might use a different font as well, right? So let's leave these blank, but these positions are important for us. Okay, and we have to keep this up. Now let's go back to my symbol. I'm going to kind of go out here and get rid of these things because I don't need them anymore. And just to be on the safe side, for my slot machine graphic, I'm going to save it. I'm going to resave it just as a backup. File, save as, I'm going to call this, actually, you know what, maybe I'll just rename it. Yeah. I'll get in there, go into my project, and for slot machine, because I've got everything kind of laid out the same way. First of all, I don't need this JPEG image. Okay, move that to the trash. That was my original one. I'm going to call this slot machine, right? The slot machine itself. Okay, so I've got everything I need, and typically what we do is we add in each one to the manifest. Remember, like last time? We'd have a manifest for everything, we add them in. Okay, so here's where we're going to depart from this, and for the first time we're going to show you how to use this new tool that I want you. If you're going to buy anything or try it, do a trial, this is good. The only thing is it lasts, I think, only 15 or 30 days. So this is where I get you to look at this. I like using something called Texture Packer, right? And I believe Texture Packers are both available on Mac and PC. Let's take a look. So I'm going to go Texture Packer. Now, there's different ways of doing this. I like using Texture Packer because it's kind of an all-in-one, right? Now, again, you can download this thing as an example, and it's available across platform, as you can see, Windows, Mac, and Linux, right? It'll work on any platform. It's about $50. It costs about right around that $50 level. So if you're going to buy it, I mean, this is the one thing. If you're going to add anything from a textbook perspective, whatever, don't try and pirate it. It won't work properly, I'll tell you right now. I recommend highly that you do it. If you're going to do anything, this is the one, right? There's other ways of doing it, and I'll show you what it generates. It generates a map, right? Well, if you're too poor, you should buy, there's textbooks involved too, right? So instead of a textbook, it's going to be this, right? So let's take a look. So we've got this version of Texture Packer. The latest one is 3.8, right, as an example. They also have other ones. They also sell something called Sprite Illuminator. Actually really cool objects as well. and physics editor. I highly recommend the texture packer one. That really works well. It's from these people at codeandweb.com. Really solid stuff, and it's used. I definitely use it in a number of projects, a number of games we've created, and we're going to use it throughout from now on, right? So highly recommend you get it. If you don't, you have to make sure you do it on kind of manually, which can take a long time. Okay, so let's show you what this thing does. So I already have bought my own. Hopefully it's not. I've swapped out my machine, so it's not going to ask me for another machine because I just got a new machine. So let's check this out. I've got mine under design, and it's texture packer. And if texture packer, if you notice, I got 3.6. If you go, you can choose different objects. Like for example, easel.js is an output. So I'm going to choose easel.js and create a new project, right? And if you notice, right, this is a drag and drop environment for my quote-unquote sprites. Now, up until this point, we've been using bitmaps, right? But here's where we're going to make a departure from bitmaps into sprites and what sprites are. Sprites are bitmaps, right? But not all bitmaps are sprites. And the reason for them is sprites have additional properties in easel.js. So it's almost like if you look at the display object superclass, as where all other objects on the canvas come from, we have bitmaps, and we're going to use some bitmaps. But anything that moves or interact with on the screen, we want to make them sprites. Why? We can add them into something called the Sprite Sheet, one big sheet, so one object to manage as opposed to like 10, right, or more. So I got to drag and drop this. So let's try this out. So I'm going to kind of go in here, and I'm going to go to all these symbols and everything else. I'm not obviously going to include my UI element positions, and I'm going to include my spin button as well. There's one thing, here's what I have. I don't want to include my slot machine graphic. It's not going to be a sprite because my slot machine graphic is not something that I'm going to be interacting with, right? It's going to be something that's going to be static that sits on the screen. So that's the only one that I'm not going to make a sprite, right? The rest of them make sense that I will, right? So let's just do that. I'll kind of highlight all of them and uncheck the slot machine graphic one. Oops, let's try that again. Let's see if I can do this properly. Okay. And then drag and drop these into my texture packer. Now what it does, right, which is kind of neat, it creates one symbol, one object with a bunch of images. Oh, I don't need this one either. So I can kind of get rid of this button template. All right, so that's kind of a smaller image. So if you notice, my total size is 200K for everything, right? And I'm only going to load this. No. I'll get the new version another time. I only need to use this one object to load in my manifest now, as opposed to a bunch of them, right? That's the kind of way to do that. But however, it takes it one step further, and as you'll see in a second. So I've got all my sprites, right? I want to publish my sprite sheet. Now there's a little publish button on the top here, right? And when I create my publish, or when I click my publish button, right, it says, okay, so what do you want to call the JSON file? There's two parts to this thing. The JSON file, right? JavaScript object notation that takes a look at my sprite map and where all my sprites are positioned on my sheet. It actually is an atlas. It tells me where everything is. And it does it in JSON format. I need this because easel.js likes JSON format, as you'll see later on. So I'm going to call this slot machine. Right? I can also call this atlas, right, which is probably a better name. So I'm going to go courses, and again I'm going to put it in my 397 and here inside my slot machine project, and I've got my atlas, and I'm going to click save. Now it's going to ask me for my format. My format is a ping format, so it's going to create another ping image from all these images, right? It's going to combine all these images together and stitch them together, right? So I'm going to call this my atlas again, because one is the JSON version and one is the ping image. Two different files. I'm just going to call them the same name and click save. Okay, produced everything without any errors, right? And if you notice, my sprite sheet is 251 by 206, so it's pretty small. I did not include my slot machine background. And now I'm going to save this just because I may have to add to it later. I'm going to save this as a project in the file, save as, and kind of go to my courses 397, and I'm going to go to my slot machine project, navigate there, and call this slot machine. That's my whole project, right? Okay, good. So I've got my project saved. I can close this out now. So what did I produce? What did I do there, right? What did I do that stuff? Well, if I look at this, I'm going to open this with, I don't know, my favorite program, brackets, let's say. Let's take a look at brackets for a second. And again, you can look at with any text editor. It produces this JSON file. Okay, a couple things that happen here. It says, I've got a couple things here. Images, here's my, in my atlas.ping file, and then frames. There's just two new things in my JSON file. These are objects. This is first object, where I'm getting my atlas from, right? And this would have to be the full path to my image atlas, which we're going to change later on. And the other object is my frames. And frames tell me each of my objects. Look, 2, 2 in my coordinate, inside my ping object. And it's 64 by 64 width and height, right? So this is telling me where all my images lie. And then it names them. Banana symbol is my first frame, which means it's this one, right? Because remember, we're doing zero-based arrays, right? And then my bar symbol, that's what I'm going to call it, is my second one, which is this one. Okay, so that's how I know it knows where to find them. It creates a map of where all of the textures, if you will, or the sprites will appear inside my texture atlas. The name texture atlas we use because we're kind of saying that each of these objects, these little images that we created, are textures, right? And my texture atlas is a way of us determining where each of the images or textures are positioned, right? So we can get to them later. And so instead of loading each one individually, we only load one big file, and then we access where in the texture atlas we're pointing to load them in. Okay, we don't need this piece. This piece is useless. So I'm kind of going to erase this piece here, right? This is just kind of Texture Packer saying, hey, we made it from Texture Packer. Okay, so I need all this stuff. I need all this stuff, but this is the exact thing I need for my Sprite Sheet. And if I look at my API documentation here with Easel.js, and if I go to Sprite Sheet, here's my Sprite Sheet class. If you notice, this is what it looks like. I got my frames, and I've got my animations, and I can do this by hand, or I can use Texture Atlas to do it for me, Texture Packer. Texture Packer does all that stuff by itself, and it tells me kind of where everything is. I can also use this for animation techniques, which we will do in the next assignment. Assignment 3, we'll do some animations, right? And we're going to do that after we know how to use this texture atlas. So I need to kind of set this up. I need to kind of set up a Sprite Sheet. This is kind of what it looks like. I need to set this up as a data element, and my JSON file is going to be a data element that I'm going to use to reference. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a new Sprite Sheet. I'm going to create a new Sprite Sheet that's going to say, my new Sprite Sheet is going to use this data element that I've just created from my files. That's really what it is. Okay, very, very simple. So now, join me on Visual Studio to do this work. We're going to create a new project in Visual Studio based on our template. So I'm going to go into Visual Studio, and we created that. You should by now, have your template for Github. On Github, if you look at COMP397 Create.js boilerplate, we created that a couple weeks back. Let me show you that. You can also download it if you don't have it yet. And you'll need this for your test for next week. Remember, test next week as a reminder, 8:30 sharp is when we're going to be doing it. We're not going to wait for anybody, right? So let's go into my repositories. And if you remember down here, here's my Create.js boilerplate done 14 days ago. You can certainly go in here and fork me on GitHub or download this Create.js boilerplate to start off with. This is the one I'm going to be using for the test. And I'm also going to be using this for our new project for our slot machine. All right, let's do that. So I'm going to I've got it right here, download it, and I'm going to just jump off from this point. Here we are. And if I run this boilerplate the way it is, what do I get? Remember, this is what I got last time. I've got this, the hello world with our pink button that Sonia gave us, right? Right? So this is what we got right now. So we got to modify this just like we did last time in order for us to get what we want. Now this is our good size, 320 by 480. And this is going to be the size of our slot machine. This is where we're going to put our slot machine graphic. So that's one thing we need, right? What we get with the boilerplate for those people who want to remember, right, as an example. And I'm going to create my new project from that. Remember, we created a template. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go new project. And if we created the template, it's under your C#. Remember how we did this last time. If you've done this with me, you should have this. I'm going to go down to COMP397 CreateJS boilerplate, right, and rename this project, right, COMP397 slot machine. Capital S. And you guys are going to have this up online. COMP397 slot machine. And press OK. So this will be the stuff I've done today. You're going to see it up online now. Okay, so there's my slot machine project, right? I need to make a couple more changes. In my index.html file, I'm going to change this thing to, instead of COMP397 lesson 2 part 2, which is where I made this thing, I'm going to call this thing slot machine. Okay, that's cool. I've got everything going from here, right? Now I'm going to create a new repository on GitHub. Let's do that again. So here's my GitHub. I'm going to go and do plus, a new repository, and then COMP397 slot machine, just as I wrote it before, so you guys can access this thing. Create a new repository. There it is. I'm going to copy this thing right now, go back into my Visual Studio and Team Explorer, go to Changes, make sure that all my changes are recorded, created new Visual Studio CreateJS project. Okay, and then I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Unsync Commits. I'm going to copy in. I'm going to copy in the URI, which I just lost. There it is, and press Publish. And when I do that, if all things go well, when I go to my GitHub, right, and I refresh, now you've got my new project, COMP397. I don't have my symbols and all those things yet. I'm going to add them in, right, because I need to do that in order for us to have access to the assets. A couple things I need to do. I need to go into my assets and get rid of Sonia's button, right, because we don't need that right now. So we're going to get rid of this pink button. Get rid of that. Okay, so I've got my images empty, and you know what? My sound, my click sound, I'm probably going to get rid of that too. But for now, let's leave it as is. Let's now go into my courses, where I have my stored everything, into the place that I've got my, well, that's weird. The place where I have my slot machine project, and I've got all this stuff. I'm going to put all this stuff in there, including everything. So now you'll have the UI elements, the Excel file. I'll put that up there too for you if you want to use that. If you want to use the same format for yourself for the next project, I'll throw that in there too. I'll throw that all into images. There you go. That's all in there now. And you even have the TPS document, which is the texture packer document. So if you ever download and install texture packer, which you should, you'll have my outline for the texture as well. So you can actually go in there and modify the texture. I highly recommend it. You'll have problems, guys and girls, if you don't get something like this to help you out going forward. You need a couple tools. I've tried to give you as many open source tools as possible. Sometimes you got to bite the bullet and buy something, and this is where I'd say buy texture packer for our course. Okay, so we've got this atlas that I've got in here that I'm going to look at in a second. I've got all my symbols and everything else. I've got to modify now a couple of things. We're going to come back to my index.html because I've added my button classes in a second, because we already made that last week. Why am I going to recreate the wheel? But I'm going to go back into my game.ts file. Here's my game.ts file, and I've got a couple things I got to change up, right? So one of the things that I got to make a change to is my pink button. That doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not going to load that up anymore. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I don't need my hello label or my pink button. I need to get rid of those. So I'm going to get rid of those two game variables. I'm going to leave the positioning there. My preloader for now, I'm going to leave as is. I'm not going to change that function or my stats counter or anything like that. I think we got everything we need. I don't need any of this stuff, this pink over, pink button out. All that stuff's going to be handled by my button class that I'm going to be creating, right? I'll leave my pink button clicked for now, though, because we'll use that as a template to use our button click event. Okay, all this stuff can go. right? Because we don't need any of this stuff, right? And this is what I expect you to do for next week for your test. You take your template, modify your template, and add stuff in. Make your own button. Probably is going to be part of your test. Okay, and then let's take a look at hint, by the way. I'm going to add in slot machine graphic, right? So I need that for sure. So I'm kind of outlining here with my comments. I need to add in my slot machine graphic. Well, in order for me to do that, I've got to go into, come on, Tom. I don't know what's up with my mouse today. I don't know what's up. I'm going to go into my my manifest here, right? And we're going to bring back, everything's not working properly today. We're going to bring back a button, but this slot machine graphic we're going to just call slot machine or background. Probably be the best thing to do, call it background. Normally I call it the same thing, but in this particular case it's more appropriate to call it background. It's going to be under images, and I'm going to call it slot machine. This is where it is, right? So this slot machine is what this is going to be, and it's going to be of type ping. So slot machine.ping, right? That's our basic background. I'm going to bring that in first. Okay, so there's my slot machine. And I need to create that as a bitmap. That's my only bitmap that I'm going to be using for this whole project, right? If I do things correct. So we're going to call this our background. So I'm going to say var background, right, is of type create.js.bitmap, right? And it's a global variable that we're using here. And down here now, I can use my background, right? That's going to be kind of generated down here. So I'm going to say background, right, is equal to new create.js bitmap, right? And then I've got to mention where it's going to be coming from. So I've got to go assets dot get results. Remember we did this last time? I want to mention that it's going to be called background, and that's where it's going to be. All right. Now I need to start this at the top left corner of my screen. I know it's 320. It's not by 480. I think it's by 474 or something like that. That's okay. I'll start it off at the top for now. We can adjust it later. So I'm just going to say stage.addchild background. And if everything goes well, we should have our background added in right now. Let's check this out. So I'm going to go add this, start the project off, and there are build errors. Well, let's take a look and see why. Let's see. Well, this is bad. It kind of built it anyway. Let's go and see where that asset is. And where am I? Oh, here it is. I forgot to add the comma. All right, there we go. Let's try this again. That's good. That's what a TypeScript does for us. It gives us the tooling we need. Otherwise, it would normally run, right? Let's refresh. The reason why we're getting this, we're not refreshing. We should see our slot machine graphic now, right? So this is the first piece we've got. Our slot machine graphic is there, and I'm still running at 60 frames per second. This is a great time to kind of throw things up on GitHub for you people, right? So now you're going to get all my graphics, and all the work that I just did isn't going to be lost, right? Now they're just some placeholder symbols for now, but you just have to replace them with your own. Okay, so that's the first thing. So I'm going to say go to Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Changes, and make sure that nothing's untracked. So I got a couple of untracked files here. I'm going to add them in too, and I'm going to go to Added Slot Machine Assets. Right? Click commit. That's the first time I'm doing that. I'm going to go home, unsync commits, and sync. And when I do this, you'll now have access to on my GitHub all those things I just did. Okay, so you don't have to do that yourself again if you want to follow along. All right, or compare with what I have. Okay, that's the first thing. I got my background. Now I got to add my buttons and my other stuff. And you know what? I need this stuff that I just created from Texture Packer. This is a great position to do this in. So I'm going to go to my atlas.json file and double click, right? And if you notice, I've got my atlas.json file is a JSON file, right? So again, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, right? It's a format that we use and more popular now than XML, right? From a data perspective. I'm going to copy all this stuff. I'm going to copy it, right? Again, I could reference JSON, but that would be a totally different thing to do. And I'm going to create this thing as my atlas. I'm going to say var atlas is equal to, and then I'm just going to copy and paste all this stuff, right? Cool. So that's where all this stuff comes in. All right, so that means now I have this object, and if you notice, if I hover over it, IntelliSense gives me a shape, the shape of my new object. And if you notice, Atlas is an object that has several properties, and each of these properties are other objects. In fact, if anything, it's an atlas of properties, or a object of objects, right? We even have this object, which is an array of arrays, right? So this is really slick. That's why I use Texture Packer to generate this stuff for you instead of you doing it by hand. So these are all my frames. These are my images, but this image is wrong. Atlas.ping. This isn't what I want. I want to load up. It's under images, right? So it's assets, images, atlas.ping, which should be here as well. Did I have that in here? If I don't have that, I'm in trouble. And why don't I have that? That would be very bad, peoples, right? This would be causing me an error. Let's see, did I miss that one?
Yeah, you need this one.
Oh, that one, but where's my atlas.ping? Did I save it somewhere else? This is why I saved my project, because if I don't save my project, I mess up, and then I don't know where the hell I saved it, and I'm in trouble, right? So let's go back. So I'm going to go back to my Texture Packer project, and I'm going to open up my project again from my files. Luckily, I have this TPS file, which I saved. Double-click onto it. I got it. Now I'm going to publish it again, right? But when I do that, it tells me where it's going, right? So here's my Sprite Sheet to users, Thomas, downloads. I didn't want it under downloads. What the hell, right? That's incorrect. So I'm going to kind of get that from my downloads folder. Why it's there. I don't know why. I was doing some marking the other day. Here's my atlas.ping. I'm going to kind of take that right now. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to put it in my course files where I had it before, and then drag and drop it over. That's just the best way to do it, right? That's the wrong one. The wrong course files. It's this course files. And right here. And, sorry, right here. I'll be okay. Okay, let's go back over. I've got my one file I didn't have. Now this is good. I'm going to drag and drop this across into here, atlas.ping. Okay, cool. Okay, so I know then, thank God that I checked, otherwise it would have driven me crazy. Where is it? How come it's not working? It should work, you know. Assets, images, and then atlas.ping, right? That's what so I got to give my full path. Later on, I'll show you how to use your manifest to preload this one and access it here. For now, this is the easy way to do it, okay? So again, we've loaded this all up. I've got my background. I've got to create this new object, right, which is my Sprite Sheet, in order for me to use it, right? And I'm going to call it Texture Atlas. So what's the format for that? Well, it's right here. So I've got my data. This is my data. And now I've got to say in the global namespace, I've got to create something like a Sprite Sheet. I'm going to create it as a new create.js Sprite Sheet. Okay. And that means every object in it is a sprite. I can't use it as a bitmap, so I have to modify. Later on, we're going to have to modify our button class. So it's a sprite, not a bitmap. Just keep that in mind, okay? So how do I do that? Well, in my game variables, I got to create this new object. So I'm going to say var Sprite, instead of Sprite Sheet, we're going to call it Texture Atlas. Here's my Texture Atlas, right? Is of type create.js dot Sprite Sheet. Okay, so I've kind of named it and it's in the global space. Now, after I'm preloading, I'm loading my manifest. I've loaded up my background. I've put this on. This is a great place to load up my other stuff as well. So before I do my setup stats and everything else, this is a great place to load my Texture Atlas. So kind of in my preload function, I'm going to say load Texture Atlas, right? And we're going to put that in there. So I'm going to say Texture Atlas, then, right, is equal to, now if I define it here, can I access it here? Here's my problem. I'm going to call this a problem for now. I've created it in the global namespace, but I'm defining the U object here, just like I did for my assets. I can use my assets inside my files, so I should do the same thing with my Texture Atlas. Is equal to a new create.js dot Sprite Sheet, and it's going to be what? Well, I'm going to use my atlas, right? So I call this my atlas, right? This is my atlas, right? And this is my atlas. My atlas goes and gets fed into my texture atlas. My atlas is my JSON file. It gets loaded into my sprite sheet, and now my texture atlas refers to objects in my sprite sheet. Okay, that's all it's doing. So I'm saying my texture atlas object, now that I've created, refers to all the properties of my sprite sheet. Okay, this is great. Now I have access to my sprite sheet, but I have to be able to use it. Okay, let's do a couple things. First of all, I need to load in my other classes that I'm missing here. So I've got a couple classes that I had for my last project. One of them was called my button class, and the other one was called my label class. And I want to do that. So how do I do that? Well, I already have it loaded. And to save you guys trouble in typing all that stuff again, I'm going to go into Github. I'm going to go to COMP397, my last lesson that we did, which was, we did all this stuff, which was, I believe, part 3. I'm not sure if I did it there, actually. Or calculator. I think I called it calculator. There it is. So in my calculator class, my calculator example, I have these scripts already, so I'm not going to retype them, right? So here's my objects, and here's my, in my objects, I also have this config thing. I want to kind of keep those two things in there. So I'm going to kind of drag and drop my config inside my project, right? Which kind of drags all that in there, so I have access to all those classes, right? Why do this again? Why recreate the wheel when it's already done? And here's my objects, which also includes, I'm just going to drag and drop it here into my project, which also includes my buttons that I created last week, my buttons and my label. Let's take a look at those things. My button class is still intact, except I got a couple of issues, right? It extends my create.js.bitmap, right, object, and it's giving me a bunch of errors. Like, in fact, it's saying, hey man, I don't even see create.js in here, right? And there's a reason for this. We're going to get to in a sec. Okay. Same thing with my labels, right? If I go to my label object, and if you notice, what I'm doing here, when I put in create.js, the reason why I can't get to it, right? I don't see it, is because my typing isn't. This module isn't part of my typings. Now, the easy fix for this, if you get this kind of error ever, right, is to include the same typings that I have here within my library. Like, for example, my easel.js library, I can just include it like this to make it a self kind of module that works on its own. That takes away that error, right? Because basically it doesn't understand easel.js, the library for easel.js, and all I'm doing is creating a reference path to it, right? Because I'm putting it into another project. Okay. I don't need the other stuff like preload and sound, because I'm not preloading and doing any kind of sound in here. So I'm okay with this one. Eventually this will be redundant because I'm going to add this back into the project. And I'm going to do that. So the first thing is, again, if I was creating a module for next week, this is what I need. I need to create a module like this, using the module keyword. I created the module with this keyword, kind of a word that I name. In this particular case, I'm calling the module objects. It's in a separate folder inside of my project, right? Here's my project. It's called the button object, right? And then I've got to kind of copy and paste this thing back into my project by including it into my index.html. So here's my index.html, right? And I want to do is I want to drag and drop my button.ts file into this before my game.js file. Right, so I'm going to make some space, and I'm going to go button.ts, drag and drop it in, right? And when I do that, it converts to JS because it's right there anyway. And these are my game scripts. Okay, the other one I want is my label. So I'm going to kind of drag and drop the label in there, include that in there, and I also want my config, which is right here, my constants.ts file. And I'm going to change my config in a second. So I've got my config, my objects, my scripts, and I need to include them now, each of these things, in my game.ts file as references. So here on the top, I have all my regular libraries, but underneath that, I need to include all the rest of them, because I've just created my custom libraries here. So one of them is going to be my constants.ts file. Sorry, it's got to be my, yep. And then I've got to put my button.ts file, my label, sorry, first, and then my button. So now I've made references to all those custom classes, right, that I've kind of created. And now I have access to them here, right? Let's go just check out my constants file to make sure that there's anything I don't have to remove. Okay, here's my constants. I've got my black, white, yellow, green. Remember this from last time? I've got my font family as Consolus. That's pretty good, actually. Not sure if my font size is small will work inside that area. I remember 14 being the size I was using before, right? Or something like that in my bitmap. If I go back to my fireworks file and I bring up my if I bring up my my slot machine graphic, right? So I'm going to go back into my slot machine project just to show you what I'm talking about so you're not confused. Here's my slot machine graphic. I'm going to make it a little bigger so we can see it. And I want to kind of type in there again, and I use my type. And I go in there and I type 5,000 as a graphic. If you notice, the font size that I'm using, because I know I'm going to be using this thing, I've kind of put it at 12, right? So 12 is the font I'm using, and yet in my config, I'm just going to close this off. In my config, my smallest font is 20, right? So maybe I'm going to say, I'll call it a new one. So I'll say config dot, right? And oh, by the way, I'm using the wrong thing. That's not what I want. So I can access both now because I'm using I dragged and dropped them. I meant I'm going to go into my config.ts file and go export var, right, font underscore, and we're just going to call this, we'll call it the label font label, right, and we'll say string is equal to 12 pixels, so that I don't have to kind of go in there and guess what it is, right, and I can use my constants for that. Okay, so cool. I've got my constants changed. That's cool. I've got a problem with my buttons. My buttons are going to be sprites, right? So I've got to kind of go back in here, right? Here's my button class, my button TS file, and if you notice, it extends the create.js bitmap. Well, I can't anymore, right? But that means my super class is going to change as well. It can't be an image string anymore, necessarily, right? How does this work? If I go back to my documentation, I notice that my sprite, right, it uses a reference to my sprite sheet and then the name of my bitmap of my frame, which is in this case run. Right? So I need to reference my sprite sheet and then run. Okay. Cool. Which means that because my sprite sheet is a global object, right, and it's called texture atlas, I need to send to the super class my texture atlas, comma, and the name of my bitmap. That's all. Okay, so that's all I need. Let's do that. So I need to change this from create.js bitmap to create.js.sprite. There it is. I'm doing it for you so you can watch it and follow along. But if you notice, it's giving me an error because it's saying my image string, I just don't need my image string. I also need my texture atlas, which I'm going to pass in. So I'm going to say, and I called it texture atlas. Here it is. Okay, so I need both those things now. I'm sending it. So my texture atlas and my image string. I still pass my image string in there, but now I pass my texture atlas and my image string. And my texture atlas comes from the global scope, which I took it from. Nothing else changes. Okay, and I'm going to save it. When I save it, it updates my JavaScript file. If you notice, it's a big ugly JavaScript file now, right? You don't have to worry about this one. Okay, so there it is. My button is complete. And I'm not going to change my label. My label is not changing because I'm not making it part of my different class changes. I'm going to kind of put save here. And now I can kind of define my buttons as I want, right? And I need to define them in the global scope again because I'm going to be using them, right? So I'm going to go here under game variables, and I got my texture atlas, my background, and I'm also going to start creating my buttons. Let's put on my first button, which is my spin button. That would be probably the most important one to put on. So I'm going to say spin button. And then instead of create.js sprite or bitmap, I'm going to say objects.button. That's what it is. We just defined it, right, from last week. I haven't changed anything. All I did was change the type. Instead of bitmap, now it's a sprite. Okay, so I've defined it here in the global scope. Now I'm going to use it down here inside my main. So this is the first button I'm adding in. So I'm going to say add spin button sprite, right? And I'm going to say my spin button is equal to a new objects.button, which I defined. And all it's looking for, if you notice, is an image string and my X and Y coordinates for the button, right? That's what I need. And if it's centered or not. All those things are still the same as last time. So my image string, right? Well, I think it's going to be called spin button, right? And I'll check that in a second. My X and Y coordinates, what are they? Well, I know what they are. They're here in my Excel file. My spin button is 225 and 334, right? So 225 by 334. And it's not, is it centered or not? No, so it's false. Right, so that's my spin button. I've created my spin button. Let's just make sure that spin button's included. Where am I getting that spin button? From right here. In my texture atlas that I generated from my texture packer, right? I get this spin button object, right here, that points at the last frame, which is here. So in my atlas, it's actually at 185 by 155 X and Y, and it's about 49 by 49, which is all my buttons are. And that's where I'm getting it. So I'm referring to it here, and I'm passing it into my custom class here, which is sending it to the superclass here, where that's how it's generating the image. And then the rest of the stuff is the same as we saw last week. It still has an on-over and on-out event. All that stuff is the same. The only difference is I'm using a sprite image as opposed to a bitmap. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's try this out and see if it works now. So I've added my spin button. What I want to do is I want to add it to the stage. So I'm going to say stage.addchild, and now I'm going to go spin button. So now it's added to this. It should be added to the stage at this point. I don't have a click event for my spin button, and I'm going to use that click event that we had before as a template, right? And if you notice up here, right, I have my preloader, I have my init function, my setup stats, my game loop, and then I have this pink button clicked event. Well, I'm not going to call this. I'm going to have this spin button clicked event. And you know, guys, spin button clicked event, this is the click event that generates all my action for my slot machine. This is where I'm going to tie in my logic later on, right? So I'm going to play a sound for now. It's going to play the sound clicked, right? And I'm going to have to create my event listener. So I'm going to go spin button dot on, and of course I'm going to name my spin button clicked event. Here's my spin button clicked event, right? That's my callback. And of course, what type of event is it? A click event, right? And I'm also going to pass in a reference to this, to my object. Okay, so this is the button. Here's my background, my everything that I normally do. I did my background first. Remember, it's an order of layers. Each display object displays on the background in order the way you put them. So right now, my background is first, and then all the buttons on top of it. Otherwise, they're going to be hidden behind. I don't want that, right? Let's see if this works, if I didn't make a mistake. If I did, we'll fix it. If I didn't, I'll update GitHub so you have all this stuff. All right, there's my spin button. And look, it has my functionality. And it's in the right position, approximately where it should be, right? If it's not, if I find that it's a little off, and it looks to me like it's a little bit to the left, it's probably because I have this little space in here, right? How do I get rid of this little space, right? Well, I mean, I'm off by a very, very small amount. I'm off because my custom CSS is moving my entire object to the right. But if I click it, it still has that same functionality that I had last time. Okay, now I got to tie in my code that I gave you guys from my slot machine. I got to wire up my button to my code. How do I do that? Let's do this first. Okay. So I've got to import those functions in here. Right now I don't have a custom class. First of all, what I will do is I'll add in, I'll kind of update GitHub for you guys so you have all this stuff so I won't forget. So I'm going to go into Home. I'm going to go to Changes. Make sure that this is not untracked, this button class. I'm going to add this in. And now if you notice I added my buttons, my labels, all this stuff, and my constants. I'm going to say added config button and label classes, right, to my projects, home, unsync commits, sync. So now it's my next commit. You notice I'm building my project one commit at a time, right, as I go. All right, cool. So I've got it there. And now what I want to do is I want to drag and drop that functionality. Well, I know it's part of my slot machine project, which I've already given you, right, on GitHub, which is right here. And inside my slot machine project, inside my JS file, right, in my main JS, let's open it up with my favorite brackets, right, another editor, right. If you notice, I have all these, I know you want to update, all these different functionalities here, right. If you notice, a couple things I need. I definitely need this function reels. Definitely need this one because I kind of generate my reels from this. In fact, I need a lot of this stuff right now. I don't need this because I don't need to show my player stats. I don't need my tally results or any of this stuff right now because I'm not doing any of this stuff. Although I could include everything in here for now and then remove, which might be easier, right? My show win message and my show loss message, that's going to be pop-ups to show alerts. I'm not going to do alerts, so I don't need those two things. Check range, I definitely need. So I need my check range function. I know that's a custom function I got to add in. So I'm going to kind of copy and paste that. So copy. Again, this comes right from your slot machine, right? I'm going to go in here under everything else, under game loop. I'm above my main, right? I'm going to kind of put this in, and maybe below my, or above my spin button. Here it is. So here's my function check range. So this is a custom function, right? That's what this is. And if I go back to my brackets, here it is. I even say it's a utility function to check the values falls into a certain location. I'll put that comment in there that I missed. Okay, that's one thing. And then I'm going to go back into brackets and grab the rest of my functionality, all this. This is my, again, this is stuff I've given you, right? So I need to get this, put that in there. I'm just copy and pasting, guys. So far, so good. Now, if you notice, it's accessing something that I don't have because it tallies up how many blanks and grapes and all that stuff I have, which means I need all that tally stuff that I had before, right? So let's go back into brackets. I'm going to kind of correct my errors one at a time. And if you notice this fruit tally, I need all these tally variables. I might as well take all these for now. I can remove them later. Again, it's better to add and remove easily. So I'll put them here under game variables. There they are, right? So all these are in the global scope, and by the way, they have no typing because I took this from the old project that had nothing to do with TypeScript. So far, though, no other errors. I'm pretty good to go. I can probably click this, and it's going to generate my spin. So I can get my spin result going. Okay, cool. Let's go back into brackets. I don't need player stats. I don't need to reset my fruit tally for now. I don't need to reset all, right? So I'm not pressing my reset button yet. Here's my check jackpot to see if I've won the jackpot, right? Let's keep going. I've got my reels function, which I just used, right? And I've got my determine winnings function. Okay, I need this piece, my winnings, if I wanted to see how much I won, right? I'm not going to put that in right now. I just want to make sure it spins the reels, right? Okay, here's my spin button. This is from using the jQuery. So this is almost exactly like my spin button today. So I need to use this whole function right here from my if statement, if my player money is greater than 0, la 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 la. And then I have, here it is, else if my player bet is less than or equal to player money, so I have enough money, then spin results is equal to spin the reels, and then generate my fruits, which I'm going to print out. So I need these two lines. Okay. Copy. And I'm going to go into and you guys, some of you are already fading out, so I'm going to explain everything in a second. I'm going to go into my little spin button clicked event that it makes a sound, and I'm going to put that in here. Right? Well, if you notice spin result, I have no idea what spin result is, right? And I don't know what fruits are because spin result and fruits are something that exists in my other file that doesn't exist here, which means they're at the top somewhere. So here's my spin result and fruits. I need to define these two objects right now in the global space. So I'm going to kind of go back in here, and I'm going to put them under my tally variables for now. Okay, so I've got some game variables that I'm using, but I got no errors. What I want to do is when I click my button, not only do I want to make the sound, but I want to use the console for now, console.log. I want to send out my fruits result to the console. Right, so I'm going to print out the result of my spin every time I click the button. This is the first time I'm wiring up my button, right, with the logic that I gave you. All right? Let's try this out. I'm going to run this thing. Good. And I'm going to refresh just to make sure that my changes have taken effect. I also need to look at my console because this is where everything's going to happen, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to see anything. So I'm going to go to JavaScript Console, which is going to appear here for me. Now yours might appear to the side. You can change that. There it is. So in here is where I'm going to see the result when I click this button, if things go well. Blank, blank, cherry. Grapes, bar, cherry. Hey, I won. Right? Blank, blank, banana. So I've got that going on. Every time I click the spin button, right, I kind of generate those results, right? And I've kind of linked my logic, right, to my button. So when I click my button, it runs through those random numbers to generate my result. I'm going to hold it there, right? And I'm going to explain what I did really briefly, and then we'll kind of end it off with a bit of stuff to talk about next week in 2 seconds. So let's save everything. I'm going to put up everything, stop debugging. I'm going to put everything up to GitHub for you guys to have that link, and then you can do the rest. Here's my changes. So I added in my game, I wired up basic button functionality, spin button functionality. Okay, so this is how I would do my project. I would build my project step by step, every commit, right? And then of course I need to go into home, unsync commits, and sync. Okay, so again, as a recap, I did first part of the class was generating all my assets. Then I used in the second part of this class, I've kind of used texture packer, which is this one you have to buy, right? And by the way, when first step, generate assets. Second step, record the positions of each of the assets in my proposed UI, the one I'm going to make, what I'm creating right now, which is here, right? Once I've got the assets created, right, then what I want to do is I want to generate them by using texture packer to open up a new easel.js project and drag and drop all my assets in there to generate my new texture atlas, which is a JSON file that nicely easel.js uses. That looks kind of like this. Oh, I missed it. It kind of looks like that JSON format, right? I took that JSON file, modified it just slightly by just changing the path and put it inside my new project, right? I also dragged and dropped a bunch of the stuff we did last time, my button class, my label class, and my constants. From what we did last time with the calculator, I dragged and dropped that into this project to build my project up. I don't want to recreate the wheel. I want to use my classes I already have, right? And then what I've done is, from these classes and objects that I've created, I finally went and created a couple things. The first thing I did was that was a little different than last time was I created this new thing called the texture atlas, which we're going to see again and again, by the way. This is just the first time. And this is only one way to do it. If you're more comfortable making everything bitmaps and not using texture packer for this project, go ahead. You can do that as well, just like we did a calculator. But each one of those buttons are going to be a bitmap instead of a part of the texture atlas. You can do that as well. I use a texture atlas because this speaks to me a little bit more efficiently than using bitmaps for every single one, right? Then I wired up a spin button, a global spin button, and I took the code, some of the code that I presented to you in your slot machine project that I gave you up on GitHub. It's shared on GitHub. I took exact code. I didn't make any changes to this pretty much, and I dragged and dropped it into my code, right? The only thing I did extra was here in my spin button, which I've generated right here. This is the only button that I use, right? I generated my spin button, and what I did was I created my, I just took a couple of lines of code from my other one, which is my spin result, and I basically called my reels function, which took, if you notice what it does, just like I showed you last time, my reels function generates my bet line, right, and returns the bet line, which is just a string array, right? That's all it does. It returns it to spin result. And then what I do is I break up spin result into each component part. So spin result 0, it's the first part of there's 3 parts of the array, right? 0, 1, and 2 for each different symbol. And then I took the entire array and printed it out to the log. That's all I've done. So every time I click the button, it prints the array, the string array to the log over and over again. That's all I'm doing, okay? So that's in a nutshell. I've wired up, that's what I call wiring up my logic to this UI button that I created, okay? Very, very simple. One thing to note, and I think we covered this a couple times, and I'm going to cover this next week a little bit more when we do our test a little bit. It's things to study for the test. You need to know Create.js. Example, the Easel.js API, at least from a basic, how do I make a button? How do I put an image on somewhere on the screen where I've asked you to put it up? All right, you need to know that for the test next week. Okay, you also should know how to do random numbers, right? And this is an example right here in this last project we did. Math.floor, right, which reduces the number so it's an integer, and math.random generates a number between 0 and 65, right? That's all it does, right? So next week I'm going to get you generated another random number. I might even have the random number already, or the function already made for you, right? So you know I just need you to access the function, right? Because again, this course isn't so much about knowing every single function in JavaScript, but rather using these functions, right? So you need to know how to do this, to generate a random number in JavaScript. And I'm going to give you access to the internet if you need to know how to look it up and everything else to use it for next week's exam or test, if you will, all right? So you're not going to have access, you're not going to miss access. So you're going to have access to the internet for Easel.js API. You'll have access to my videos if you want to look at them while we're doing the test. You can do that. You'll have access to all the GitHub that you want, right? All that, but none of this will help you. I'll tell you right now. The only thing that's going to help you is if you practice Create.js, make some simple buttons that work on your own, play with the template that we have, this Create.js boilerplate. If you don't do that, next week you're going to get stuck. You're going to go, what do I do now, right? I don't want you to get there, so you need to practice your Create.js, this boilerplate that we created. It's all up online. Make some buttons, make them do something, you're going to be fine. If you don't know how to do that for next week, you're going to be in trouble, all right? And also, just to let you know, I'm going to give whoever finishes first next week a bonus, right? So it's going to be a bit of a hackathon. I'm going to give you a time limit, and when you're done, I'm going to say, okay, who's ever done first gets 5% bonus, right?
5%, 10%.
Hey, if you don't want it, it's up to you. It's there for the people who want it, right? Otherwise, see you next week, guys.
No, not 5%.